Okay, so hey guys, and welcome back to another Axel 72 video. And in today's video I'm going to be giving my prediction for the Mark Dickinson versus Troy Williamson fight. And so if you are new around here and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so. Like the video if you do indeed like the video. And this is a Patreon requested video, so it will be going straight out onto YouTube due to that it is fight week for this fight. And it's not one of the biggest fights in which I normally talk about, but it's a good matchup, and definitely a matchup in which, when it was requested, I was intrigued and excited to do a little prediction for. And if you are wanting to request your own kind of any kind of combat sportsy related content, to be honest, then head over to the Patreon. The link will be in the description. And I appreciate all the members and all the support I've had with it so far. And again, like I say, plenty of videos have come as a result. Thank you very much. And so let's get into this one. So of course, like I mentioned, this isn't a massive fight. I mean, it's a good English level fight in which it's for the English super middleweight title, and it's on a next gen matchroom show, which there is, I don't know if they're even still classed as next gen shows, because it does seem like matchroom are putting on a lot of their shows as kind of a lot of their UK shows especially haven't really been particularly big, in my opinion, as of recent. I mean, they had Harlem Eubank versus Jack Catterall not too long ago. That wasn't a tremendously big fight, really, either. They've had, Pat Brown making his debut as a main event. Again, nothing really that big. This fight as the main event in Pat McCormack versus Miguel Parra is a good way to get Pat McCormack, a bigger fan base built up. But again, it's nothing really too big. It does seem like they're in a bit of a situation at the moment where all their big fights and all their big names are being taken by His Excellency, and they're kind of just left, scraping together with these cards. It's the same with the George Liddard versus Kieran Conway fight. Great fight again, but not big names. Something I wanted to just quickly touch upon before we get into this one. But of course, I think this is the co-main event from what I believe, and I think it's a tough fight for Dickinson. Will it be his toughest test he's had in his career so far? I'm not entirely sure. Of course, if you don't know about Mark Dickinson, it's kind of tough to say where he is in his career at the moment. And, is he ready to progress? Is this a step too far? Again, it's very difficult to say, in my opinion, at the moment, because he had the loss in the prize fighter tournament in Japan, which was, of course, the only, one of the only fights that happened on that card. They only had the first round, and then they called off the event because did just seem like there wasn't really that many people that interested in it. But, coming in off that loss to somebody who had been losing to lesser opponents on paper beforehand, he's now come back to the UK, had, moved up in weight, had a win against a journeyman, and then last time out he was in a 50-50 matchup with a British opponent in Reece Farnhill, and for the most part it seemed like he dominated. I mean, I think he had, plenty of success. He won via unanimous decision in the end, but he did make Reece, struggle and have problems. Sorry if you can hear the rain, but like I say, he made him have problems, and Farnhill just didn't really look Dickinson's level. And again, he showcased that I think he has learned and developed a bit, and found a bit more of a style for himself coming in and moving up in weight and coming off the defeat. And so that's a good thing. And again, like I say, I think this fight is really gonna say to fans where Dickinson is in his career. Again, if he's kind of set to be an English, maybe fringe British type of fighter for the whole of his career, or if he's going to be able to progress along. He's young, he's only 26, and so again, he could be progressing on well, and there is still plenty of time in his career to be able to go on to these, big things and get onto these big stages and have his own main events. But again, like I say, I'm liking this as a matchup. For Troy Williamson, I mean, he's kind of been to the peak of his career. When you speak about a kind of British level type of fighter, Troy Williamson in his prime is what you kind of are referencing, really, because recently, his career has been going on a downwards trajectory. I'll talk about that in a moment, but he had a really good part of his career, around 2020, around, 2020, 2021, where he beat Harry Scarf, which was, a tremendous victory, really, in the way that it aged, because Harry Scarf went on to defeat Eko Esserman, and then he went on to fight Chukadzian, and again, like I say, that looked like a great victory for Williamson. Then he went on to beat Kieran Smith when he was unbeaten, and I got a very nice knockout there. He won the super welterweight British belt against Ted Cheeseman, who, of course, Ted Cheeseman was a very durable British opponent himself. Then he went on to defend it against another durable British opponent in Mason Cartwright. Then he had his kind of big British dust-up with Josh Kelly, which, was an exciting matchup, and a matchup in which fans wanted to see. And I think, to be fair, a matchup in which was one of the last big Wasserman, British fights that fans are really locked in and excited to see, to be honest. I think they have gone a bit downhill since. But, since then, Williamson has taken on nothing but tough fights. I think, to be fair, when you list their names, you kind of have to say his whole career he's had nothing but tough fights. But now, it seems like he's been, going on the road a bit with his fights. He had a close fight with Keeman Ajako in Belfast. I watched him ringside lose in another tough fight, against Ishmael Davis, where Davis looked a bit better than Ajako in that fight, in my opinion. But again, it was still a tough fight. Then, most recently, is what I really want to touch upon, was his fight against Jahi Tucker. He went over to America on a top-ranked show against, a big up-and-coming prospect in Jahi Tucker, and he kind of got demolished. I think that's probably the only real way to say it. And I like Troy Williamson. I've had him on the channel here. He's a great guy, and it was really sad to see it. I was rooting for him against Tucker to cause an upset, but he was moving up in weight, and I'll get upon, some of what I saw in that fight, which were kind of problems and negatives and vulnerabilities in his game in a minute. But again, it just didn't really settle that well with me, and it wasn't a performance that really filled me with much hope that there was and is a tremendous amount left in his career to give, to be completely honest. I mean, of course, like I say, Dickinson is 26 years of age and Williamson is now 34 years of age. Williamson is moving up into the super middleweight division, and he's going to be weighing in the heaviest, I think in his entire professional career, which again isn't something which, a lot of fighters move up in weight when they're having problems with the weight, but when you've already had so much success down at, a much lower weight division, moving up in weight's difficult. And I think he might just be moving up in weight because the easier matchups that, he can get, well, not easier matchups, but he can get these big fights and these big matchups at that weight, and he doesn't have to cut down. And, when they're getting, not lazy, but the want to actually make weight is kind of depleting a bit, that's when, you can see these vulnerabilities and these, weaknesses start to creep in. And again, it does seem like that is happening quite evidently with Troy Williamson. I would love for Williamson to be able to flip things around and be like the aggressive, hunter type fighter in which we, learned to love as British fans when he was coming up. But again, it's just going to be difficult for me to be able to see that. And, again, he might be able to cause Dickinson problems. Possibly he could go on to win this matchup. It's definitely not a matchup in which is as difficult as a Jahi Tucker matchup, in my opinion. But, it's definitely still going to be a tough fight. To speak about both fighters a bit more individually, Dickinson as a fighter, he's patient, and that patience is sometimes where he can get in a little bit of trouble, but again, for the most part, that patience isn't a bad thing. He fights well when he has a tight guard and, works off that strong jab. Like I say, when he starts to use that strong jab and get it going, that was where he was able to have a bit of success last time out. He was able to maintain a bit of a distance as well last time out well, and I think he can fight pretty high level in close or at a mid range when he's at his best. He switches head to body quite nicely as well, and in general nicely fights well in the pocket. He lands cleaner in exchanges for the most part. Again, I don't think he's going to want to go toe to toe with Williamson, because that is what's going to go into Williamson's favour a bit more. But again, he will be able to often land clean in exchanges. And again, going off that last fight, that's what he was able to do. I think he does carry a good level of power. And to be fair, most of his shots he throws with intent, and the combinations that he often throws them with intent as well. He plants his feet well. He works well varying up his kind of lead left hand. He can use it as a jab, but then he can switch it, go to the body with it, use it as an uppercut, go over to the head with it. Again, it's a very varied punch in which he's been able to throw, or being able to use that hand for a variety of shots. He's got a good work rate. He can stay strong and stay just coming forward and stay quite resilient, and I think he does showcase that he has heart, which for somebody who, like I say, is still pretty early on in their career and is still pretty young as well, to be able to showcase the heart in which he has shown in fights, I think is impressive to see. And again, maybe you don't want to see him taking as much damage as what he has done in certain fights, but like I say, still showcased a good level of heart. Negatives about him, I think his head movement is very limited. I think he's happy to catch punches sometimes with his head, especially that can be, a jab as well. He can leave himself open when he's leaning on his back foot a bit, and again, that's when perhaps a little bit early on he's a little bit too patient. He can get caught with, a straight shot over the top. That's what Reese Farnhill was able to land on him, and that's what kind of spurred him to get into gear a little bit. He doesn't really, he tries to fight out of bad positions. He doesn't really try and move out of bad positions. He doesn't circle off or reset. He has a kind of minimal defensive movement as a whole. Again, he plants his feet well, but again, he also is quite flat-footed. He can be loading up. That can become predictable. He can square up. Again, like I say, he can be caught by a jab, and in general, I don't feel like he handles a high output well. I think that's what went wrong, and that's what he struggled with in his fight in Japan. He just couldn't handle the high output at all, in my opinion. To speak about Williamson a bit more as a fighter, I think he has immense heart and has a good chin. And yes, Jahi Tucker was able to drop him on a couple of occasions. He still showcased that he has a good chin, and like I say, he was taking a lot of punishment in that fight by the guy who was, clearly more skilled, faster, and like I say, just was able to land with a lot more effect on Williamson. But he still was there the entire fight, showed that immense heart, and showed that he would go till the end. He'll walk forwards whenever he's allowed. He's never not a threat in a fight. He's always trying to come forwards and let his hands go as well. He keeps and maintains that high output. Even if he didn't really have the best of fights last time out, he was able to, still land the occasional shot, which was enough to, keep the opponent guessing a little bit and, keep the opponent on their toes. He catches you in the pocket, and then, like I say, in general, is a mid-close type, an in-range type of fighter, in my opinion. An in-close range type of fighter, and like I say, he's able to catch you in the pocket well. When you slow down, I think he speeds up, and that will be something which definitely will be interesting to see how that goes. If he starts off perhaps quite quickly, then he might be able to have a bit of success against Dickinson. Negatives about him, I think his speed and his reactions are slowing. Again, that's a sign of a fighter who's getting worse. I think he is getting generally weaker, which is a sign in which, again, isn't really going to go in his favour. Something which, obviously it's a bit different with this fight, but something which I saw with Liam Beefy Smith before he fought McKenna was that he, in that fight against Eubank, he looked weaker, he looked more vulnerable, and like I say, the speed and the reactions were slowing. It's very difficult for a fighter to be able to have that happen to them in a fight, then move up in weight as well with Williamson. Like I said, I feel like it's just going to make you slower, and then also be able to kind of roll back the years and still be able to throw, like, come forward the way that he used to be able to. I just don't see it. However much you want to will your body to be able to do that, I think it's just really, really difficult to be able to, like I say, roll back the years, and I'm just not sure if he can do it. I feel like he doesn't deal with head movement that well, or overall kind of youthfulness in a fighter. I think Dickinson isn't really, like I say, going to be the guy moving his head and doing a tremendous amount like that, but he will have that, speed, I think, that bit higher, and, even the power that little bit more there as well at the moment. He's been in a lot of wars, Williamson. He can be caught coming in. He's got minimal setup. His guard is becoming weaker as well. Again, another sign. His head movement is minimal. He can waste shots just throwing out of desperation, which was quite sad to see, but is what I was watching in that fight against Tucker. He's very flat-footed. He didn't used to be, but now he is. He doesn't really change his game plan. He can be hurt by predictable shots. There was a time in which Tucker threw a straight 1-2 to the body on 3 occasions. All of them landed with the exact same amount of effect from Tucker, and then he switched up to get one to the head, and then it landed clean on Williamson. And he's just not really readjusting or making any kind of, like, say, movements or attempts to get out the way or to actually counteract to that. Who do I think is going to win? I think that Mark Dickinson is going to be able to win via unanimous decision. Again, I'm going to give Williamson the credit. He's been at a British level. He's fought at, against some pretty high level opposition. He showcased that he had a good enough chin to be able to make it all the rounds against Jahi Tucker, even though he did get dropped. I don't think Dickinson is going to be able to drop him. Again, Williamson might be able to have a bit of success in close and land a couple nice shots. Again, early in the early rounds, he might be able to have a bit of success if he comes out quite quickly. Then in the later rounds, again, he might be able to have a little bit of success as well. But I think, like I say, if this was a Williamson of, say, 5 years ago, then I would have really liked this matchup, and I feel like I would have been favouring Williamson. But the Williamson that I've just seen in more recent times, I am going to lean towards Mark Dickinson, like I say, via unanimous decision. Then who we can go on to fight next? I think it's interesting. I think it will be a British opponent. I don't see any kind of European opponent or anything. I think he's probably going to want to possibly defend his English super middleweight title, possibly, invite somebody who could come in from a small hall type of scene, or, possible matchups of opponents who have recently lost and were trying to gun for British title level. And Mark Jeffers was already campaigning for the Callum Simpson fight, but then he lost to Sean Hemphill. So, Mark Jeffers perhaps might be able to get a matchup with Mark Dickinson going. That could perhaps be a good fight. Jack McGann, again, Jack McGann is, been rallying up a couple of wins off his defeat, his bad KO defeat to Lewis Green. So, again, he would probably be willing to be up in the away corner for that fight. Or Steve Woodhull, of course, got knocked out again, badly to Callum Simpson. So, maybe he would be wanting to get back in there as the away fighter again and challenge somebody like a Mark Dickinson again, a formidable enough opponent for an English title. It's always difficult with the English title because, there is a difference between English and British level, and I think there is a bit of quite a big jump in between them two. But, I think any of them 3 opponents could make a bit of sense. Maybe Mark Jeffers is a little bit, above that. But yeah, that is it for today's video. Hope you did enjoy. Like the video if you did indeed like the video. Subscribe if you're new. And thanks for watching.